In what ways does the supply chain impact value, and in what ways can it be improved? And what are the current trends that you're seeing that can improve the value to the patient?
Absolutely. And I think the first step is that the ecosystem is evolving, and we have to be ready for that, and you need a partner in place that is willing to adapt with you. And let me just back up and speak to a couple of the points that I think we're all, specifically on the provider side, seeing quickly transform amongst the ecosystem, and how we're trying to position the organizations around that. And the second point there is that no provider has it all figured out, that there has to be partnerships in figuring out how to adapt the healthcare system to be able to drive value for the patient. And I think the first step that everyone's seeing in the transform of the ecosystem of oncology is specifically around moving from symptomatic response to very much focused off personalized and prevention. And everything is very much now in an element of relationship-based care. And what I mean by that is not just treating a patient as a number, not just treating the symptoms that patient has, but getting to know that patient on a one-on-one basis and figuring out their care plan together. The rapid movement away from just office hours to any time, and being able to approach that patient and be with that patient when they need it. And then this rapid movement away from fee-for-service, not that it's gone today, not that it's gone tomorrow, but a movement towards fee-for-value, and how to position the organization to be able to be best positioned, whether that's episodic bundling, as we heard in the last panel, or shared savings, or wherever it may be, positioning your organization for that. And I think when you back up and look at the supply chain, we have to have a partner in the provider space that understands how organizations and providers need to adapt based off the patient demands and needs, not just the patient, but the caregiver and their family as well, and how to go about finding the right solutions for the problems that are sitting there. And there's a lot of solutions out there, there's a lot of problems out there, but figuring out who the best are to be able to solve our specific problem that will drive value for the patient and the organization.
So John, let me turn to you. I mean, what has UPS been doing, and what in fact does your industry need to do to integrate along this supply chain to make sure that the value is being delivered optimally?
That's right. Well, thanks, Vivek. So, you know, there's been at least one, maybe two or three, or maybe even 10 people today and yesterday who asked me, what are you doing here? and what does logistics and supply chain have to do with oncology and fighting the war on cancer? You know, our industry is logistics and supply chain. And what we've heard a lot about today was the value of one oncology therapy versus another oncology therapy. And there are a lot of elements to driving that outcome, right? That patient outcome and the positive patient outcome is really what everybody's driving at. Well, logistics falls into and can enable either better outcomes or better value and better prices, because it's the efficiency of the supply chain that can obviously affect those things. I'll give you a couple examples. You know, many of the oncology drugs are biologic-based, temperature-sensitive, light-sensitive, shock-sensitive in some cases, various different temperature requirements for those therapies. If during the transit of those medications get out of temperature range, they can become ineffective, and thus obviously the outcome gets compromised and the patient gets compromised. Likewise, there are some very expensive ways of transporting and moving these goods, and there are some very efficient ways of moving these goods and still meeting all the requirements. And that's what our industry is focused on, is how do we deliver those outcomes and help life science companies and healthcare companies deliver those outcomes by providing a great, elegant supply chain and logistics solution to make that happen. Also, you know, a lot of the discussion today has been on the patient. And what does the patient want? And making the treatment as humane as possible and making the experience for the patient as convenient as possible. So part of our mission as well is to develop and deliver supply chain and logistics solutions that are driven at the patient, where they want the care, when they want the care, and how they want the care. It could be in their home, it could be in a clinical setting, it could be in an outpatient setting. But developing those solutions really drives some of the value of oncology treatments going forward.
And this requires, I'm saying this because I have spoken to you both before, but this requires specific collaborations over specific products sometimes. So you're from Exact Sciences, and Kevin, you could tell us about what that relationship is and why it's necessary.
Well, we come at the war against cancer from a different perspective. It's been interesting to hear people from the pharmaceutical industry talk about drugs that save 12 days or 3 months or 6 months. But if we are going to win the war against cancer, it is going to start with early detection. There's just no two ways around it, because late stage cancer detection leads to bad outcomes. Early stage cancer detection, whether it's colon, lung, breast, lead to pretty good outcomes. We have a partnership with UPS around our product Cologuard, which is an incredibly innovative new test that is 94% sensitive at detecting colon cancer from a stool sample in a patient that is in a screening population and therefore not symptomatic. So through this partnership with UPS, we can ship the Cologuard collection kit directly to a patient's home. What this has done is it's opened up, it's brought so many more people into the colon cancer screening world. Colon cancer will be diagnosed in 140,000 people in the next 12 months. 50,000 will die, and it's totally preventable, and it's curable if detected early. Cervical cancer is a great example. Cervical cancer in the 1950s killed 35,000 women a year. Today it kills 3,500, and the pap smear is the reason. The pap smear misses 50% of all precursor lesions, but you keep doing it, and it takes 10 years for that precursor lesion to turn into cancer. You find it, you remove it. You've actually just basically eradicated a disease. The same can be done for the #2 cancer killer. Because if you find a stage 1 cancer, it's about the size of the end of a pen. If you find that, you remove a part of the colon, you don't even get chemotherapy. And you have a 98% cure rate. 2% of the people die of complications from the surgery. So if you're going to win this war, you have to actually look at early detection. But then the way you get to early detection is to partner with UPS and to partner with large health systems and payers in this integrated way. So our data warehouse connects with payers. It connects with big group practices. So with a primary care physician, it connects with UPS. And the same technology platform can be used for lung cancer. We think it can be used for pancreatic cancer. It can be used for esophageal cancer and others. So early detection, we think, really changes everything. It's more difficult than pharmaceuticals because the payment processes and the FDA processes are very, very complex. And in our case, we've spent $250 million to get into 1 year into launch of the product of Cologuard. So there are a lot of different ways to look at this. I think early detection and integration with all of these disparate groups is critical.
And Matt, you're from McKesson. So what's the role of organizations like McKesson in smoothing the supply chain and making it efficient? How does that work?
Sure, thanks Vivek, and thanks for letting me join you guys. So from the broader McKesson perspective, we're effectively touching every piece of healthcare. We're delivering drugs, pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, and other pieces like that. We're partnering with all sorts of organizations from a payer perspective, provider perspective, across the spectrum. Also one of the largest health IT companies in the world. And so we're touching essentially every aspect of the system in that way. But when we get directly to oncology and the part of the company that I'm most familiar with and a part of, we're doing two key things. We're delivering pharmaceuticals and health IT products, including electronic health records, for community oncologists. But in another part of the business that Dr. Pat, who was speaking earlier today, is a part of, we're actually partnered with the community oncology practice and helping that community oncology practice deliver everything that they have to deliver in their business, driving integration of data, IT, clinical systems. I feel like the key thing that we heard today, kind of across the board in all the discussions we've had, is that we're going to see increasing complexity in this oncology space over the coming decade and even beyond. And part of what McKesson's trying to do and what we're focused around at McKesson Specialty Health is helping the community practice deal with that complexity. It's complexity in clinical, from personalized medicine, from using the genome and the typing to find the right drug that may be just for a very, very small subset of the population. It's complexity in dealing with the payer from a value perspective, delivering evidence-based care for the patients treated by the practice. And it's also increasing complexity from an administrative perspective all the way across the board in terms of billing and collections and how you account for risk if you're in a risk-based contract and how you account for fee-for-service on one part of your business and workflow and things like this. So our organization, our focus is entirely around supporting the community practice, making them sustainable and viable over the coming years.
So I guess there's several themes that we've talked about today and you've been talking about just now. And I'm just wondering how supply chains, we're really getting into the practicalities of how we deliver some of the things we've been talking about. So, personalized care and very precision care, which, and I don't know if our supply chains are ready to deal with that, where you have to deliver maybe one drug to a particular patient, and that's the only time in a month you might have to deliver that. Decentralized or de-intensified care, you're delivering things out into the community or even to people's homes or to a community pharmacy and things like that. So these are the changes, but I mean, practically, what does that mean? And what are the cancer treatment centers doing, and who are they engaging to deliver this kind of thing?
Absolutely, and I think the important thing is you need all of this linked together in a very, both an IT-based as well as a human-based linkage to make it actually work. And I think, John, you mentioned this earlier on, but care is moving closer to the home. And I think what we're experimenting with, and I think what everyone's starting the conversation around is what's best for the patient. If we put the patient first, then we think about them in an acuity level. And think about them in an acuity level to say, does it make sense for them to get treated in an acute care setting? Does it make sense for them to be treated in an outpatient setting? Or does it make sense for them to be at home? And I think the opportunity here is logistics across that entire parallel, but then also when they are at home, how do you deliver the same personalized experience that you could inside a hospital? How do you deliver that personalized experience where you're able to build that relationship, where you know that they're taking the drugs, where you know that they are what they actually are emotionally attached and emotionally engaged with whoever their clinicians are. And I think the other important element on there is that it's not just a medical oncologist, that it's also a naturopath and maybe a care navigator, but it's somebody that brings that entire spectrum together and helps the patient navigate based off whatever acuity they are, including prevention, where if they're full upstream, how do we build that relationship with them upstream before they've even been diagnosed? And then if they are diagnosed, how do we ensure that they have the same great experience across the acute care setting, the outpatient setting, and the at-home setting? And the layer of technology that has to be there, the layer of logistics that has to be there to get them the drugs that they need when they need them, that's where the partnership really comes in.
So in addition to the care moving closer to the patient's home, so is diagnostics. And a perfect example is the Exact Sciences diagnostics. Collecting a colon specimen, a stool specimen is not necessarily a fantastic experience for a patient, but it's far better to do it in the privacy of their own home. And we've built a process with Exact Sciences to make it so convenient and so easy for the patient to collect that specimen with the kit that's been designed in the privacy of their own home, quickly get it sealed up, and quickly get it into the delivery network to get it back to the central laboratory where Exact Sciences can do the analysis in a very quick time frame, and so the patients and physicians can get the results as quickly as possible, and obviously then determine if further treatment is required. But so the diagnostics moving there as well, but also with customized medicine, it's the same idea. Cells are removed in some cases from patients. brought to a laboratory, re-engineered, and injected in some case back into patients. And all the logistics associated with that, and the specimens that are moving are, may need to be cryogenically frozen, may need to be frozen, may need to be cold, but it's a very fast and an important process that needs to take place. But again, making it as convenient as possible for the patient. My father, unfortunately, was a unfortunate victim of pancreatic cancer. And he lived about an hour and a half from here, but he had to drive into Mass General several times a month for the good part of a year to have the therapies. And he was not in a physical state where that was an easy task for him to do. And if there were other alternatives and ways that he could get his treatment still under the guise of Mass General, I think that would have been a great option to him. And developing the processes and the systems to be able to do that, I think is really important for patient viability going forward.
And what John says too about being able to get the best care and the care that is equivalent to a Mass General care closer to home is really what we're focused on as well. And from that perspective, what we're trying to do is really build the practice around a set of integrated health information technology pieces, but also make sure that practice has access to, at the point of care, information about available clinical trials through US Oncology Research, which is one of the largest research entities in the country and also in the world. But also, do you have availability at the time you're making a decision on how to treat a patient to the best evidence and the best advice of experts in the particular field that you're working on. And those are the systems that we've put in place for folks in the US Oncology Network, that patients in the community, so they don't have to go to MD Anderson, they don't have to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering or even to Mass General. And we know that not every patient needs to be in an institutional setting for cancer care. I mean, the advances in the technology to allow for either home-based or outpatient-based care have been tremendous. And so really the key thing from a value perspective is not only focus on the cost of the drug, but focus on the cost of the setting that the patient's being cared for in. If we could move to Devin's point, if we could move folks to the appropriate level in intensity or acuity of care, we'd have a much cleaner and happier set of patients, first of all, but also a much more effective and cost-effective health system.
And it's better for the patient.
Great.
I mean, think about any time that you have to travel in downtown or wherever it may be for care, specifically chemo. I mean, that's a very hard time for the patient. The experience that they go through, the experience that their caregivers go through, the experience that their families go through, the opportunity and the advancements in oral chemos and everything that's coming through, to treat that patient in the most comfortable setting possible, obviously is the best setting of care. But it is back to that element of what's the acuity level and what's the best care setting based off acuity for that patient.
And that's true with early detection as well, because when a doctor orders a test, they can actually get the collection kit. In this case, UPS will get a Cologuard collection kit to the patient in 24 hours. So that order goes in, integrated with our system, the kit, which never is in our facility, gets shipped directly to the patient within 24 hours. The patient can return that. But because we have the data, we can follow up with the patient and remind them to return the collection kit, because the biggest problem in colon cancer screening is people don't show up for their screening or refuse to go. We can remind them. We've driven a 73% compliance rate. Colonoscopy has about a 35% compliance rate within a year of the referral that the physician gives to the patient, 35%. So that's the secret sauce here, is actually the data integration and the service delivery. Now imagine the world when we have these blood-based tests that monitor for cancer recurrence, and you want to get that test out to the patient. There's a little company out there that's mimicking Uber that sends phlebotomists out to patients' homes. So when you talk about, Devin, getting to where the patient is, instead of coming in and having the patient do a biopsy, you'll be able to someday do a simple blood draw and say, okay, minutely, is this cancer recurring? So, but the key thing is integration. Nobody can do this alone.
That's right. And just to fly in the ointment here, but does all these things you're describing, is that going to increase the cost of care? Is it going to reduce the cost of care? I mean, is this going to be more cost efficient? It might lead to better outcomes. Is it going to be more cost efficient?
In my opinion, it's going to be more cost efficient. I think that the conversations that are happening amongst every provider out there is, one, how do you remove costs from the system? Two is how do you ensure that the patient gets the best outcome with the best experience possible? Same conversation that's been going on for years. What's added in there is how do you do that in now a risk-bearing model? And the only way to do that in a risk-bearing model is to have all three elements of acute care, outpatient care, and at-home care. And I think that we all see that as an element of less costly care environment versus more costly care environment. But to make this less costly care environment work, you need to leverage innovations like phlebotomists via Uber. You have to leverage these kinds of innovations that come through and these innovations from the tests to be able to treat the patients where they're not in the care setting of an outpatient or inpatient setting, where we have that all at our hands. So I think that I do think that will ultimately reduce cost out of the system. And I think that from a provider perspective, we're all looking for the right solution to help do that, to figure out, all right, what is the, if we were to do this, what are the elements of care that we would need to provide to be able to deliver care in that home? What are the wearables? What's the telepresence? What tests do we have to be able to do that? How do we tape that all together as one package, partner with a payer to be able to go at risk around that, and then test it out? I don't think anyone would raise their hand and say, yeah, we have the one solution here. I think everyone's testing this out to be able to say, all right, this is the best for stage 1, stage 2 colorectal cancer. Here's the best for X, Y, and Z. And I think that everyone's in that testing mode right now. But ultimately, I would say that it is designed to pull cost out of the system and to do the best thing on behalf of the patient, which is treating them where it's the best due to their acuity.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that it is cheaper to treat stage 1 colon cancer, $25,000-ish, than stage 4 colon cancer, $300,000-ish, right? And then if you took the difference there and apply it to screening, we spend as a country $2 to $3 billion to treat cervical cancer. We spend about $10 billion to treat women with colon cancer, and it's about a 50-50 split between men and women with colon cancer. So if you eradicate colon cancer by early detection or in either early treatment or prevention, you cure the disease and take costs out. Why aren't we doing more of that? Why aren't we really thinking through how we attack this problem in a holistic way? We have the data now. We know the 40% of people who aren't compliant. In this audience, people over 50, probably about 40% of people are not compliant with their colon cancer screening. Everybody knows who they are. A lot of physicians aren't compliant, right? We know who they are and can reach them out to them with Cologuard, which is as accurate, effectively, as colonoscopy at finding cancers. Find them early and pay a lot less.
I wanted to mention also that this move towards value and the bearing of risk on the provider side is no longer really theoretical. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's happening in the real world with real providers and real patients and real payers. And there are a lot of different kinds of approaches to it. And to Devin's point, there are lots of tests going on, but many of them are long-term tests and are intended to continue indefinitely. And the key thing for all of us in this is to understand what's happening in the practice, what's happening with the patient, and to be able to have a fair and transparent conversation with the payer or between payer and provider about what's going on and what the intention is, or if the provider is actually going to take the risk, as many U.S. oncology practices have done over the last several years, to know and understand it better than anyone else. And the only way to do that is to have an integrated technology set and a view to your practice and to your patient population, both from a clinical and from a financial perspective, that makes you better prepared than anybody else to do it. So just for that context, some of these practices, and Dr. Pat's is one in particular, could be more than 70% of their book of business in a value-based structure as early as next year, if the Medicare oncology care model approach actually takes off and some of these practices are allowed to participate in them. Once you get past that sort of tipping point, it's hard to see a way back towards fee-for-service as an overall approach to reimbursement. And in fact, you almost are inclined to just say, I'm going to take this other 25% of my folks and tell them, you're not paying me fee-for-service anymore. You must pay me like this if you want to keep sending us your patients.
And that sort of reimbursement schedule, would that mechanism, is that going to enable the phlebotomist to go and visit people's homes and things like that? They'll give you the freedom to do that and be reimbursed for it.
Yeah. I think it's the package. I mean, I think that as a provider, you're thinking, if you're going at risk, you're thinking, what's the least costly way I can deliver the best care for that patient? And if they don't need to come to the hospital, they don't need to come to the hospital. If they don't need to come to the outpatient care setting, they don't need to come to the outpatient care setting. It's how do you deliver the best care at the least costly rate? And I think when you look across all the different demonstration projects that are out there, whether episodic bundling or capitation, all of them, at least that I've read about, have been able to decrease overall cost of care. Many of them are still trying to show that they are delivering a better quality care outcome, but they're on track and they're delivering a less costly care. I just think the opportunity here is to deliver better quality care at a less costly price.
Do you have any questions from the floor? I have a question for you, John. UPS obviously works in very large number of sectors, I guess many of which there is specialty or specialized transportation or logistical needs for them, highly specialized, just as specialized as in medicine. So where do you see, when you look at supply chains in healthcare, where do you see healthcare is kind of lagging, or where the major wins could be?
Well, it's a trick question. It depends on where you're looking in the supply chain of different industries. I often hear that healthcare supply chain is so much worse off than other industries. And by some measures, that's very much true. But I'd argue, though, that the supply chains in other industries don't have some of the complexity that healthcare has to deal with, healthcare and life sciences. The regulatory environment, the extreme urgency around some of the specimens and shipments and the treatments that are being moved, and the stability of a lot of the products that are being moved, whether it's products or whether it's specimens or patient specimens. And so some of that has driven some of the inefficiency potentially in healthcare. I guess the other thing is clinicians are rightfully focused on clinical care first. And their investment dollars, their attention is mostly focused there. It's not so much on the supply chain. So that has led to some opportunities to really improve and make things more efficient. And we know that there's a lot out there to help improve the supply chains in the healthcare and life sciences industry. And we understand that's part of the total equation of bringing down the total cost of care and making it more accessible to many people around the world, not just in the US, but around the world as well. So there is opportunity, no doubt, and we see it all the time, and we work with healthcare and life sciences companies to make that happen.
Where do you see there's improvements to be had, and where do you think we have made improvements in recent years in terms of supply chain?
So I think one of the big improvements in the recent years has been in the transportation of temperature-sensitive products. I mean, there's been incredible innovation in the supply chain and logistics to move temperature-sensitive shipments, whether it's through these containers that are regulated, that maintain temperature and minimize shock and light for transporting shipments, and done fairly economically. That's one. The one area that there probably still is a lot of opportunity for improvement is just in the institutional setting, within the four walls of a hospital and the whole materials management process and getting products in there. I guess the third area, which is not oncology specific, it's more medical device. A lot of the high-end medical devices are on consignment from the manufacturers to hospitals and sales reps. And there's so much inventory of this very expensive products out in the field that by pulling that into more of a centralized environment and having just-in-time types of deliveries in time for surgeries, they can drastically bring down the total inventory of these very expensive implants and obviously drive down significantly the cost of the total treatment.
That's true with our Cologuard collection kits. If we had to stock 280,000 primary care physicians' offices with 20 collection kits each, our inventory costs would be so high it'd be hard to finance the business. But with our partnership with UPS, we deploy those directly in a facility that gets shipped out overnight. So this is an example of how a creative collaboration is so much more productive than had we gone to Quest or LabCorp and tried to deploy the test more broadly.
I'm going to ask a very difficult question, which you may not be able to, but it's, I mean, can you begin to quantify what, in terms of either outcome gain or cost efficiency, maybe not globally or in any, but or even an example of it, of where this really can, just to give us a sense of how critical it is in the overall value of the healthcare supply chain.
So from our perspective, a couple of our practices did a multi-year test and program with Aetna and published the results in the peer-reviewed Journal of Oncology Practice in conjunction in a joint issue with the American Journal of Managed Care, and effectively found that over Aetna's patient population, taking an approach focused on evidence-based around care coordination, around advanced care planning for patients that had terminal disease, that they could, in fact, significantly reduce costs, improve outcomes. And we're talking about 30 to 40% reductions in hospitalizations and emergency room visits, higher reported outcomes from patient, but also the actual outcomes on the outcomes line were either identical to the higher cost approach or actually better. And so that's one thing from a provider perspective, one thing that can be done. I'll also say that, from a third-party wholesaler and logistics perspective, that if you can imagine pretty intuitively what it would look like if suddenly you stopped delivering multiple different kinds of manufacturers' products together to a hospital or a doctor's office, and instead you made each one of them deliver them separately on a different schedule, how many millions of different things would be moving back and forth, and how inefficient that might be. And so one of the things that all of us that are involved in supply chain really help bring to that is an efficiency of just motion and resource and activity that has been quantified. I don't know exactly the numbers offhand, but I believe there's a Booz Allen Hamilton study that says it's something like $15 to $20 billion a year in terms of health system savings in just the United States alone from taking that distribution approach rather than having direct shipment for every product everywhere to every potential place that it might go.
And it's easily rolls off the tongue, but it is a lot of work. When you look at how to actually reduce cost in a healthcare system and to reduce clinical variation, the easy elements are, as you guys were talking about, which I totally agree with, is supply chain and being able to say, all right, what drugs do we need at what times, what devices do we need at what times, and actually drive that. And I think that there's a lot of help that logistics companies like UPS can always provide in that sense. Then there's the piece of looking at every clinician that delivers care in your care setting and saying, all right, if this is the clinical pathway of which we decide upon, who's off? And is that driving better clinical outcomes, less clinical outcomes? What's the cost associated with that? And it's really a one service line by one service line to be able to fully understand the care. And then it's about attacking it and saying, all right, if this is the pathway of which we agree upon, which it should be, because it's evidence-based, this is what we're all going to agree to treat our patients on. And there's always examples where we'll have to go off that treatment plan for one reason or another based off that patient's, again, acuity or whatever it may be. But getting all clinicians to actually treat that one way is not the easiest thing to do in the world.
I guess, I mean, what's the distribution? I mean, because you talked about this sort of chaotic thing where, people are just ordering stuff whenever they like and that kind of thing. So how common is that actually? And how has everyone actually got this down to a fine art already, or is there? I don't have any sense of where people.
Yeah.
Well,
I think for the most part, the system works pretty well, and in fact is actually set up to deliver results like even on a personalized medicine basis. If I need this thing once a month and I know I need it tomorrow, can I get it here by tomorrow? The answer is almost certainly yes. The more interesting question about this really is, what are the regulatory and policy incentives that actually drive away from this more efficient approach? And a number of the things that the federal government and state governments do actually make it more beneficial for a pharmaceutical manufacturer in particular, but also potentially a Cologuard manufacturer or a device manufacturer to say, I'm not going to take the most efficient approach. Instead, I'm going to do the approach that actually is the most profitable for me because of the downsides I would have if I take that approach. I think it's relatively small still, but it is somewhat growing, and it bears addressing and consideration from a policy perspective.
So can you give us an example of one of the barriers that you discuss?
Yeah, so a number of the ways that the federal government has approached reimbursement for drugs, for example, actually disincentivize a manufacturer from using a wholesaler or third-party approach to that delivery of the drug, because if the manufacturer actually takes that cost in-house, it could build it into the price of the drug. But if the manufacturer pays a wholesaler or somebody else to deliver that drug, that's not counted in the price of the drug, and any discount given to intermediary between the manufacturer and the deliverer or the infuser of the drug or pharmacy, hospital, actually gets netted out of the price of the drug. So effectively what the manufacturer has done by moving it through the most efficient system is disadvantaging his end customer.